you're listening to another episode of the Hashtag Kangaroos podcast.
Whatever I've been through, the moment I see you, things start looking over.
Welcome to another episode. My name is Dean Vassick. You'll find me on X at Hashtag Kangas, Instagram Hashtag Kangaroos podcast. Tonight, I'm not alone. I have Frank, Jesse and Mark back tonight. And we are back after a bit of a long exodus there, boys. It's been a couple of weeks. It's been a few weeks, actually. And the off-season has pretty much already started. Well, it's probably been going for a few weeks now. Frank, I'm going to start with you this week. We're getting linked with everyone, and the first domino to fall is Jack Darling requesting a trade to North Melbourne today. Is he the missing piece to the puzzle that will get us back to the glory days of the 90s, Frank?
No, I don't think he is, Dean. To be fair, I don't think that's probably even why they've got him. I think, if anything, this is probably a slow burn, a bit of a like a Hodge did at Brisbane. And if it works, maybe we see the benefits of it in 2 or 3 years. As I said to you off air, mate, it's pick 64. That's the rumour, is that it's pick 64, which was the last active pick in last year's draft, and we may not have even used it. So at least we can say that it hasn't cost us a lot of draft capital to get him across. I'm assuming the Eagles will probably pay a portion of next year's salary as well. So I think, look, it's one that's not going to. I don't think it's going to show immediate results. I can't see us, winning 6 of our first 10 or anything like that because we've got him. Maybe it is one of those ones that in a year or two we start to see the benefits of it. But, I don't think it's going to be a needle mover for us, really. But at least it hasn't cost us a lot. No,
I think West Coast will probably still pay half of his salary next year. It's more of a longevity move for himself. Jesse, you had a few words about this before the podcast started. How do you see the Jack Darling move?
Yeah, look, I just find it strange. I can understand the need to bring in an experienced tall forward. I think that's one of the things we talked about during the year needing. It's a weird decision for mine, and without knowing him and how he operates, we're talking about a guy who came into the season with soft tissue injuries, struggled to get through the year. His stats for the year aren't. They're not jumping off the
career lows in a lot of them.
Yeah. Well, effectively is career lows in pretty much all of his statistics. Pretty much every statistic. So, and there's massive question marks on his body. There was times this year where he honestly could not bend over. He could not bend over to pick up the ball. His back looked stuffed. And that's the worry for mine. And look, as I said, I can understand bringing someone in for the leadership qualities, for the experience. And you know what? Maybe he will come in and he'll be able to teach some younger forwards around leading patterns and stuff like that. But from what my observations of him, we're talking about someone who there was question marks coming into his career. That's why he slid, and albeit he's had a great career. He returned after the pandemic in really bad shape, was obviously not training well, was a little bit overweight. Now, if that's the type of person you want to bring training standards, I've just got question marks. I can understand the need, the want, but unless they know for a fact that he actually brings a certain level of leadership quality, then I don't see a reason for it. If he played more than half the games, I would have a real eyebrow raiser. We went down the path of bringing Jared Waite in, and he'd been absolutely cruel with injuries. That was a very different point in where we were at. We were challenging. And we were able to get his body right. And even he was a very different player to Jack Darling. I'm concerned with some of the deals being talked about in terms of length. Money's irrelevant, but length of deal. Someone said it's at least 2 years with the trigger. Someone said a trigger for 3. That's what I read somewhere. That if he's got a trigger for 3, I'd tear up my membership. That'd be the worst thing I've ever read in my life. I've never said that, but that would frustrate the hell out of me. Because it would just cry out of trying to bring leadership, we'd be scraping the bottom of the barrel. And I mean, we've spoken over the last few weeks about Hawthorn and their ability to attract. They've had one good season, and all of a sudden they've got Battle, they've got Barras. They're going to absolutely strengthen their backline, and they'll be challenging. I see them seriously challenging next year. So, and what have we attracted? Jack Darling, and I think Parker is probably more likely than not. We can get to Parker, but I understand why we've looked at it, but he better have absolutely passed the medical with blinding. He must have had a blinding medical, because I'm just not 100% sure what he adds. And the argument that he gives adds more than Toby Pink is fairly irrelevant. With all due respect to Toby Pink, I'm looking at the top 84 players in the league this year who are classed as key forwards. And realistically, I think 81 of the 82 players are better than Toby Pink as a forward. So there is a lot of players here that you could take a shot at and bring them in, and they'd offer more than Toby Pink with respect to him as a forward. So I just think there's other things I would have looked at. It concerns me if this is our grand plan. It would, if we were able to attract a lot more serious talent, and this was just a throw at the stumps, then I'm okay with it. But if it was longer than a 2-year deal, or if they're bringing him in with this expectation that he's going to, like Frank said, turn the needle, I just don't see that happening.
There's strong words there, Jesse. Mark, now, and also Jesse, he was on the Channel 10 News yesterday, and he did mention, I'm coming down here just for the next 2 to 3 years. So I assume there's a trigger for a third year there too, Jesse, just to let you know about that. Mark, we were rumoured and apparently close with Tim Membry, but didn't want to wait on a decision there while he was in limbo by the looks of it. So we decided to go down the Jack Darling path. Are you the opposite to Jesse and happy to have him for the next couple of years?
I'm not excited about it, put it that way. But I don't know enough about the inside thinking, I don't know. All I know is that Adam Simpson's saying he's a great athlete. He's a super hard trainer. But Adam Simpson said his ability to mark, so in other words, his athletic ability, because he's only, I think, 191 centimetres, has dissipated quite quickly over the last few years. But they're obviously bringing him in to, and I have heard that he's been very good with developing some of the younger forwards and the West Coast side. So I assume that's part of the thinking, and I would hope the club's spoken to Adam Simpson at length about him, about what he could offer, and they've got a very specific plan for him over the next 2 seasons, certainly the next season. And I think, based on Clarkson's comments at the Best and Fairest, that they're, I wouldn't call it desperate, but I think they're very keen to try and add enough into that side to make us more competitive in the games that we lost this year. I think they certainly feel like they need to win 6, 7, 8 plus games next year, and they're looking at any way to do it. And look, as much as, Toby Pink's not the answer, absolutely agree with that. But how many other options did we have? I'm not sure. We would have had a look at a number of players. There probably weren't too many knocking on our door to come in. So, again, versus Parker and others, and I would have preferred, if there was a Cadman available or something like that, or a few of the other guys sort of struggling for games at other teams. I'm sure they've talked to them. Maybe they still are, but it maybe gives them more flexibility with Comben as well. And I think Teakle and Malley in particular still need a lot more development. So I don't think we're not giving up much. I mean, we've listed a number of players that weren't good enough. Do we bring in players when we weren't going to bring in players in the 60s and 80s, 60s, 70s and 80s in terms of the draft? So, and we had to replace Shields and Greenwood. So perhaps, these guys that we're going to bring in are going to fill that sort of role. But it is hard to get too excited about him. But hopefully he'll be a role player for us. And I don't know if he'll play more than 10 or 15 games a season, but we'll just have to wait and see and try and be optimistic about it. But it's not one that you go, it's going to move the needle, that's for sure.
No, I'm really on the fence with this one. Yeah, because I said to Jesse, his stats were at a career low last year. I'm not too sure if he adds value outside of the football field. I guess that's a big part. Jesse sort of said there was a couple of issues there in the last few years about his body weight, especially during COVID. So there is questions about his work ethic outside of football, I guess, and his diet and so forth. So hopefully he does bring a bit of professionalism and he does become a guidance for a lot of particularly a team that has a lot of young prospects coming through, like a Zane Dersma, Paul Curtis, and so forth. So hopefully he can add something there. But it'll be it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. Frank, and another player that's been linked is Luke Parker. Heavily linked, I should say. Probably a player that I feel would add more value to a group like this for the next few seasons. Are you happy to have him come across?
Yes, Dean. Yeah, in a nutshell, I think he sort of fits. Probably is a bit more of a better fit for what we're looking for. I get that there's been some knocks on it. The fact that it's another midfielder that comes in and pushes someone out or whatnot, but I think that be outweighed with his experience and his leadership and the bigger body too, which I think is something that we got exposed with a few times this year. Was just not the lack of ability or the desire, but just the physical strength to keep up with some of the bigger bodies in the midfield. And I think he would bring that. So I'm much more at ease with the Luke Parker thing. Again, it comes down to draft capital. I don't want to give, certainly don't want to give away pick 2 or next year's first round or anything like that, anything silly. If it can be something that's, sort of acceptable to both teams, then I'm happy for him to come across. I think he'll fit in well, but I'm just weary of what we offer.
I think the Swans, he's still under contract for another year.
Yep.
I think the Swans will be happy to salary dump him after this year because obviously they want to keep Warner and we're going to have to offer a lot of money next year. So I think if we're prepared to pay, I don't know, half to 3/4 of his salary next year, I assume he's on big money for next year, probably 700,000-800,000, I would have to think at least. So if we could pay 500,000 of that, I think the Swans would be happy to let him go. So there won't be any draft capital. Go on, Frank.
Yeah, and of course, and to the point that, I think, at least it was this way, I don't think it's changed, that clubs are obligated to use a certain percentage of their salary cap. And I would think that we'd be right at the bottom end of what we're using. So it could even be a situation where we've got to find players that fit that salary bracket so that we use our allocated cap space. So I've got no problem with it if we're prepared to pay 3/4 of it, and the Swans, do the old, give us next year's third rounder or fourth round pick or whatever. Yeah, you go, okay, that seems to me like a good option.
No, it definitely does. Jesse, 291 games, and only the 8 games for the Swans this year, playing more as a high half forward for them since coming back into the team. I think he came back against us as a sub. You like that role for him next season, possibly as a high half forward with little spells in the midfield if he does come across?
Yeah, I do. Look, I think we've all spoken about, I don't think any of us know. I think all of us know that we don't need another midfielder. And there was a lot of talk about us needing a senior body in the midfield. That's the last place we need a senior body. But what we do need is someone who can play a role in the team and also be able to go into the midfield. And I think he complements that perfectly. Sure, this year he's only played, I think, the 8 games or so. I think statistically, it's, I think, his 3rd worst year or on par.
Second worst
year. Yeah. So, look, it isn't obviously his greatest year, but he is still, he's still been decent, I would have thought. I think that he will add a level of leadership. He'll add a level of standards to the team if we get him. He'll bring finals experience, obviously. And more importantly, he's someone who can play forward and can then pinch hit in the midfield and drive standards in both areas of the ground. So, look, I think it's a big tick. I don't think it will cost us much. Again, it will be a bit of a salary dump. We'll just give them whatever. I mean, what I'd love is, what Geelong and that have done, where, like with Bose, for example, from the Gold Coast, where they got pick 9 and Bose for
Salary, yeah.
for salary. I
Yeah,
mean,
to take your salary, yeah.
yeah, I'd love to go identify a fringe player elsewhere and get some picks. That would be fantastic. But, only the smart drafting clubs seem to do that. So, I'm sure there's some creative stuff we could do with Parker. You are absolutely right. Sydney need the cap space because the Western Australian clubs are going to go extremely hard on Chad Warner next year. Freo may not have the draft capital if they're able to bring in half the names that they're linked with this year. But either which way, someone's going to be having a crack at Warner next year. So Sydney does need to get rid of some of the cap. So, I'm not necessarily convinced that we have the proactiveness to get a positive deal out of it, but I think we can get a deal that's not going to cost us a whole lot and get a player that I think can add at least 2 years of value.
Yeah, I think, that's the whole idea. And I guess, Mark, do you think he really adds to the culture of this group as well and leadership? He's been captain of the Swans before when they've been successful. Is that the main focus of going after a Luke Parker and maybe even to a lesser extent Jack Darling?
Yeah, I 100% think it is. I think this is a way to get development coaches, on-field development coaches into the club with the youngest squad in the AFL without the issue of the soft cap. I think if we're going to get potentially, I don't think this will be the last. I think there's probably a couple more still to come in. It'll be over the age of 25, 26, 27, even close to around 30. I think there'll be at least 3 or 4 that are going to come in. So I shouldn't say at least. I think there'll be a maximum of 3 or 4. And I think that's big part of the thinking is they need on-field leadership because we just lack badly players in that 25 to 30 year age group. And outside of Core McDonald, there's virtually none now that Shields and Greenwood are gone. So they've got such a gaping hole in that area. I don't think they've got a lot of choice. And it hurt us in games where we were competitive and found ways to lose them. And it hurts us when we're the tide's turning against us in games and we struggle to hold on. And players like Parker will go into the midfield in third quarters or at the end of quarters when we're struggling or when we tend to get into trouble. And those big bodies, I do think, mature big bodies. I mean, look at Geelong. I mean, their whole culture is based around mature big-bodied players for the last 10 years. And they keep bringing them in. They're going to bring in Jack Martin. They're going to bring in Bailey Smith. They keep bringing guys over 25, 26. And once you get on a roll and build up a culture of success, it gets easier to do that. And we're a long way from that now. But I think that's where Clarkson's thinking is we can't survive with the youngest playing group in the AFL because we'll never get above 5 or 6 wins. And then you'll struggle to keep players in the medium term if we don't start moving the needle in terms of our performance next year. We can't. Clarkson knows that, the club knows that they can't go 6-7 years in the bottom 2. It just becomes too difficult to hold on to players. So they will do whatever they have to do right now to try and find a way to make us more competitive. And I think it gives us 2 things. It gives us mature bodies on field in the short term that'll help us during periods of games where we struggle, and it'll help us with development of those players and teaching of those players, both from a training standards point of view, a cultural point of view, and an on-field decision-making point of view during stressful times in games. And I think they're determined to go that way this year, and I understand why Clarkson's doing it. Look, Darling might be an issue. Parker definitely isn't. That's a great decision. If he's coming in, I don't think anyone can argue against that. I think he brings too many positive things, particularly the fact that he can play forward and mid. But I'd like to see 2 or 3 others come in with experience into the club as well, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about players we are getting linked with. Frank, should we be looking, like Jesse says, maybe at players that have still got more upside? Now, we've got Luke Parker, definitely on the back end of his career, had one of his career low years as far as a lot of statistics go. Jack Darling, we just mentioned before, career lows in a lot of statistics. Should we be getting more upside players that are 26, 27. I guess, I mean, we got Dylan Stevens, Zach Fisher, probably didn't work out as well as we would have hoped. But, should we be looking at players like a Jake Riccardi, who can't get in the GWS team, a very good forward, would be a good foil for Nick Larkey. But, should we be going for those types of players?
Well, the question is, Dean, do we know we haven't? The thing is, after you finish bottom two for the last 5 years, it's a tough sell. So all it really requires is if we go to Jake Riccardi and St Kilda go to Jake Riccardi, or Hawthorn go to Jake Riccardi, you tend to know where he's probably going to go if he's going to come back to Melbourne, and it's unlikely to be us. So I think with a lot of those people, Tim Membrys and stuff like that, I suspect the club probably has reached out and tried to get maybe players of a higher caliber or a bit younger and might have more to offer statistically, but you've got to convince them to come to a club that hasn't got out of the bottom two for 5 years. And I think that's a tough ask for the recruiting team. So it might be a situation where we go with the Jack Darlings and your Luke Parkers until we can, climb out of the bottom four, and then maybe it starts to become a slightly more attractive proposition for your Jake Riccardis and players like that when they can start to see the movement upwards. But at the moment, I think when we can't, we're not in a position where we just take what we can get. I think we've still got to be selective, but I think it's very hard to pull a top tier player from somewhere else and convince them to come to North.
No, that's a fair point there, Frank. Jesse, Dan Houston now is another player that is linked. I don't think he'll want to come to North, but we would have to give up a lot to get him, wouldn't we? And would he be worth it at the end of the day?
That's a really interesting question, whether or not he'd want to come or not. If he wanted to come, then we would be offering absurdly high money, you would think. Look, he is a very good player. He is a very, very good player. I don't see the same risk profile as Jared Pollock or something like that. I think he is a quality player. My concern is that what are you going to have to give up to get him in terms of trade? I don't think Port Adelaide is going to remember that they absolutely ripped us off on Jason Horne-Francis and give us a good deal. I think they're going to absolutely request something ridiculous from him. And it's not like he can just walk through to the because he's contracted, isn't he?
He is. He's contracted for 3 years.
Yeah. So it's not like he can walk to the draft, and even if he did, he'd just end up at Richmond. So it means we have to give something pretty big up. I've heard rumours that Port aren't interested in a future pick, while Fremantle potentially are, because probably of the Warner stuff. Maybe we would offer a future first. Would I be happy with that? Well, if we didn't finish in the top four, I probably would be. Bottom four, sorry. But is he going to come in and make us win an extra 3 games? Probably not, but he's going to come in as a senior, experienced, all-Australian quality half-backer, and that will free up some other players to go move into other positions, your McKerches, etc. So it does add quality to the team, which we desperately need. That all said and done, I would give us Buckley's chance of him coming. We would have to offer $2 million a year. To the point that Frank made is that why would you want to come to North Melbourne? I do not see a single compelling reason to come to North Melbourne other than I want to play with Harry Sheezel. And I mean that in all honesty.
No,
You've got a club, you've got the lowest fan base club in the league, of the clubs that matter. GWS Gold Coast are relevant, but we've got less fans than every other club in the league. We have been we've been irrelevant since 2016 from a football perspective. So that's 9 years next year that we haven't been good at football, really. Well, I guess halfway through 2016. I'll say 8 years. I'll give us 2016, even if the second half was a debacle. So that's 8 years of that low fan base, still looking at years of pain. It is going to be a hard sell. It absolutely is going to be a hard sell. And the one draw card that, if you look at the only clubs that you could say are probably in as much trouble as us, are Richmond and West Coast. But the difference, and I think that they are on a much bigger cliff than us, because they haven't even started going. They haven't even fallen off the cliff yet. I think they're both about to. The difference is that they are the two biggest clubs in the country. And at the end of the day, you can be doing poorly as you want, but you can say, I've got 100,000 members, I've got all the resources of a 100,000 member club, and they can sell that. So, yeah, look, I don't think Houston's coming. It would shock me if he was. And even if he was, Port, I think, would absolutely pillage us, and we'd have to give up probably more than we want to. But, look, we need to add more talent to the list, because if we add more talent, we win more games, we'll attract more talent. That's the only way we get out of it. I mean, St Kilda, the Dogs, they're pretty similar size to us, and they're able to attract a certain level of talent. You're always going to probably miss out on your top tier who really want to play, at the MCG in front of a big crowd, but they're able to attract a certain level of talent. So that's all we need to do. We need to get competitive again. And if that means we do have to overpay for a player, then so be it. But I think we need a few Dan Houstons to fix our problems.
Yeah, and I think that's a situation, and that's the problem. I agree. He's a very, very good player. He should have been All-Australian this year. Quality user of football, gets 23 touches a game in the back half, good intercept player. But at the end of the day,
he was All-Australian this year, wasn't he?
He was. Yeah, I think he was. Yeah, I knew he was in the squad, but I kind of stopped looking at the All-Australian team once I'd seen Sheasel and Sherry weren't in there. So, but yeah, look, I guess Mark, if he did choose us, on the off chance he did, how much of a price do we pay for a guy that is 27 years old, but he is an All-Australian? I mean, what would you be comfortable with? Because at this stage, it would probably have to be our first rounder this year, and maybe even the first rounder next year.
So my view on Dan Houston is that he's a 27-year-old dual All-Australian. So the last 2 years of his career, he's played All-Australian. He wants to move back to Melbourne. Port Adelaide will want a very good pick for him. So top 6, 7, 8 pick. And if the clubs he wants to go to can't do that, that puts North in a good position, particularly given we are going to pay him probably more money than anyone else is. So it's a hard sell, but I don't think it's out of the question. If he's as keen as what it's been reported that he wants to get back to Melbourne, Clarkson's done it before. So I wouldn't be surprised if they were able to do it. And if they are able to do it, we'll give up our future first. We might have to offload that to a Freo or some other club and get an early pick back into this year, be it at somewhere in the top 10, 12. And I think that will get the deal done, because we'll probably offer him $200,000 a year more than anyone else. And he might look at that as a 27-year-old of setting up his life beyond footy as a pretty good option coming back to Melbourne. So I don't think it's out of the question. I think the fact that it's been talked about today suggests that there's more to it than probably what people think. Not saying we're going to get him, but if we are in the picture for it, I've got no issue with us giving up our future first next year to get it done. I think there's a limit to how many kids we can keep bringing in when we've got such a massive gap in that age group of 25 to 30. And he's a quality player. He's 2 All-Australians in a row. As Jesse said, he would free up McKercher to play in other positions. He would be a very, very good addition, to the club culturally, and obviously a super quality player. So I hope they go all out to get him, to be honest. I think they should.
I guess, Frank, what would you be comfortable in giving up for Dan Houston? Would you want to give up a player? Now, we've got $1.5 million forwards, and we want to keep the first rounder this year. Do we sort of say, what about Zane Dersma for a straight shot for Dan Houston, 19-year-old with plenty of upside? Would you be comfortable? I'm just saying, Look, we've got a lot of half forwards here, Mark. And if you want to keep your picks,
Well, if
which
they were
are,
going to do that, then they should have bloody got the small forward last year in the draft instead of
I will
doing
talk
that.
about that with you in a minute, Mark.
All right, sorry.
Yeah, no, we'll talk about
I'll
you.
mute myself. All right.
Please do, Frank. Or do we just, or you just Zane Dursman's just got too much upside. We're not giving up our young guns for this bloke.
Well, I think with Zane, it's probably more we don't know what his ceiling is, so I'd be a little bit uncomfortable with that because, if he'd been there 2 or 3 years and he was still at the level that he's at the moment, I'd be starting to think maybe while he's still got some value, maybe we pull the trigger, but not off the year that he's had. I think there's still too much ceiling to explore and see what he's got, and there's a couple of things with the whole Dan Houston thing. You got to convince him to come, which in effect, when you're in the bottom two, it's going to be money. And I sometimes worry about what the other players or how the other players react to a guy coming in and getting 1.5 million or something like that. When you got guys like, Sheasel and Jackson Archer and all that sort of, busting their ass for, who knows, maybe half of that or less.
Frank, they're getting paid a fortune for finishing bottom two. They'll be happy to bring in someone else to help them get up the ladder.
Well, that's true as well, Mark. I understand the argument both sides, but I always sort of feel that, particularly with Dan Houston's, again, though a very capable footballer, I don't know that he's going to fix the immediate problems, the real glaring problems at the moment in our list. So
he'll go to full forward and kick 70 goals next year, Frank. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, yeah, if that was something that we could possibly think he could do, then I understand that a little bit more. But another guy to go to half back, I don't know. I think there's others that I'd rather target that really would fill more of a need that we have than Dan Houston. So, no. Getting back to your question, Dean, I'd be uncomfortable letting go of Zane Dursma at this stage of Dursma's career.
Yeah, what about you, Jesse? I know that's a bit of a steep price. We don't know the ceiling of Zane Dursma, like Frank said. He could be the next Nathan Fyfe. I think he'll eventually go into the midfield like about 20 other players that we've got at the moment. If you want to keep your picks, because we're worried next year it could be another top 2 or 3 pick. This year's the second pick. It's a big price to pay. Do you have to give up a player like that to get a player of that quality? Who is the finished product?
Look, it is a very good question. You do need to give up something to get him, either in the way of the draft or a player. I would be very reluctant to get rid of Dursma 1 year into his career. I mean, he may not even want to go to Port Adelaide, to be fair.
Yeah, of course.
Although I did notice he was liking Jason Horner-Francis' pictures, so, maybe he does. I'd be reluctant to do it because we've made a commitment. We've taken him, and I'm glad that we're going to talk about the elephant in the room or the wizard in the room. And we've made a decision, and that's kind of what we've got to live with. And I look. Did he show? Did we want more from him this year? Yes, probably yes, especially because of the player who went next to him. Absolutely. Did he show signs of being something special? Yes, I think so. His ability to take a mark above his head, his ability to read the ball out the back, good. And that game in the VFL where he played midfield and he ran around looking like Nate Fyfe was ridiculous. He just needs to build his tank.
Is there a harder position to play, Jesse, for a guy of his height playing on the half-forward line with his weight in their first year of AFL footy? I reckon it's very, very, very difficult.
I think the hardest positions to come in as a kid, brand new kid, is key forward. I reckon. Well, I think it's forward line in general. Key forward. I think small forward is a ridiculously hard role to play, with the caveat if you're in a bad team. I think in a bad team, that a small forward is the most difficult position.
So what's his height? It's about Tim Membry height, isn't it? Similar to him.
What is he? He'd be 190.
190 centimetres. So.
And Tim Membry would weigh almost 15 kilos more, I reckon.
Zane would weigh more. What does it say on the... Do you get people's weight anymore, or if they block
No,
that?
you're not allowed to.
No, I don't. It's got it still on Footy Wire.
Wikipedia might have it.
He looked like a 16-year-old playing against men to me in terms of his body weight, but
he's pretty thin. He's pretty slight. He needs to put on a bit of weight and bulk.
With a shoulder injury as well for most
Yeah. He probably needs to grow up a little bit as well, and I say that with the most respect in terms of he seems very young still in terms
that's
of
fair. I think that's
his
fair.
application.
I think that's well known.
Yeah, and I don't know what his training standards, etc., are like. But we took him knowing that he was a upside player. We didn't take him knowing that we were going to get, we took McKercher because we knew that he would A, had upside, but B, he was a ready-made player. We took Sheasel, probably didn't. Well, we never took Sheasel thinking what he was going to be, but we took him again knowing that he'd probably have an impact straight away. Zane, I think we took on upside. So, look, I would be reluctant to do it, though we are talking about, like Mark said and everyone said, we're talking about a dual All-Australian whose best years statistically are the last 2 years of his career. This year he was the 1, 2, 3, 4. He was the 5th highest rated general defender in the league. Harry Sheasel was first, so you can take him out of it. So you've got Sinclair, Holmes, Flanders, and Houston. And I would say that out of those 4, Houston is probably the best defensively, as well as offensively, because he is actually pretty decent defensively. So
Jesse,
look,
you've got to give up a future kid, not a current kid, though, don't you?
Yeah, my only worry about that is, and this is my only worry, is that this year's draft, just the problem seems to be getting bigger in terms of, at least they had Trainer at pick 4 at one stage. Now they've got no key players for the top 8. They've just got midfielders, back to back midfielders, and then they've got 3 or 4 key positions from like 8 to 10 or something like that. So this year's midfield heavy, meaning we're either going to reach, or we're going to take another mid, or we're going to or we're going to take that pick and get other players. Next year's, from all reports, and I don't want to kick the problem down the road, but next year's, from all reports, has a pretty high quality level of key position players. So it's the wrong order for us. Yep. So I would hate for us to give up a future first, finish bottom 2 or 3, and the pick that Port Adelaide gets used to pick up an absolute freak, because then we're going to look even more stupid against that club. And I cannot bear giving them another superstar. So I'm not giving them a player, and I'm not giving them a future first.
I think the time is now for us in terms of.
Look,
I don't think we can just keep looking at kids 2 or 3 years down the road.
I agree.
I think we've got to start doing something now.
No, I agree. Look, I would be happy to give away our future first. Yeah, I'm being a little bit facetious on the fact that I would hate for that player to become a star, because I think we've bled enough for Port Adelaide already, and they've taken us for enough of a ride. But at the end of the day, you're getting a dual All-Australian. He's still at a decent age. By virtue of the position he plays, he should have a little bit more longevity. And as I said, it releases players. So yeah, look, I'm all in on giving away a future first. I'm also all in on giving away pick 2 if we got him and something back that was decent and got us a key position player, or we were able to get rid of pick 2 for 2 other picks and we were able to manipulate it somehow. So I think there's other ways of getting around it, but at the end of the day, we're talking about a situation that I still think is very, very, very unlikely. I think you'll end up at Carlton or a big club.
Yeah, I mean, so Mark, that's a no for someone like Zane Duursma for Dan Houston?
Yeah, absolutely not. Not interested in doing that. I think.
Yeah, fair enough.
It would be an embarrassment if that happened. I think that can't happen.
Yeah. Nah, look, that was just an example of a player. I certainly don't want to trade Zane Dursma, but if you wanted to save your draft capital and not use all your bullets in the chamber, because that seems to be the only assets we've got, and we've got a plethora of half forwards on the list that maybe you might have to just give up a quality young talent like that to get a finished made product if you're that desperate to sort of make inroads next year. But
That'd be a hard sell to the fans, I reckon, at this point.
100%. Not a lot of them would be very happy with that, but not a lot of hands are happy at the moment, Mark. So
True.
Yeah, but we'll see how we go. Frank, obviously Parker and Darling heavily rumoured. We've talked about Dan Houston. Any other players you would like at the moment?
Oh, well.
Any particular area, I should say, of the ground where you'd like a player that maybe is on a trade block to come to us?
Well, look, I'd have a look at anyone like the Matt Taberner example.
Yeah.
If they're still around in pre-season or the rookie draft, something along those lines, I would hope that we're looking at that kind of a player. To add a bit of depth, but I don't know that there's anyone. I can't think of anyone that we don't need. I guess Dean is what I'm trying to say.
Ben Brown.
You know what? No, you know what? When we were talking at the start about Jack Darling, I was looking at players that rated around the same mark of him this year. One of them was Ben Brown.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't go down that path personally. But
Gary
there's no one.
Dempsey?
Who?
Did you say Gary Dempsey?
Yeah, you're losing that, Mark. I think that red white's really starting to kick in now. So
yeah. No, Jane. I think they just need to explore anyone that's available there, or the kind of thing that we're doing. In a sense, with a Jack Darling, where there's a player that may only get offered 1 year next year, and if we offer them 2 years, we may be able to get their services for the right price. But I don't think we're in a position to go and jag any all Australian squad type player out of another club to come to North, at least not for the right reasons.
what about you, Jesse? I mean, the Carlton small forward is it Matt Owies?
Everyone on Twitter's all in on him. They're big fans, especially the girls. But
Marnie Cohen,
which I don't. Yeah. Well, her and a few others, but I don't really see it myself. But each to their own, I suppose. But look, in terms of players I'd like to bring in, and I was reading Gettable earlier. I've thought about this one for a while. Why wouldn't we target someone like a Frost for a year or two from Hawthorn? Because they've told him he's going to get a game next year. How the hell is he going to fit into a backline that has Barras and Josh Battle? Like, what position does he play? Because Sicily probably goes forward in that situation. I think in most situations, they probably want Sicily to play forward. Mitch Lewis has been injured a lot, and that's probably still a weak spot. I mean, they've got a pretty dynamic forward line. But if I was him, I'd be questioning if he's going to continue to get a game. I mean, he's 31, but that it's a player of that type of mould that I think's someone we should be looking at. There's a couple going around. There's one of the kids at GWS. Last name starts with D.
Dirksen.
Yeah, like people have spoken about him being potentially gettable. Wade Dirksen. I think I think he's a bit more of a ruck type of player. But again, we need to get depth in, and we need to get some quality in. Someone else that I'd potentially be looking at is, and I think Webb's, but maybe touched on it, but I know that they've talked about it on Twitter, is around Jacob Constanti from the Swans. He was a former top 20 pick. He kicked, 14 goals.
Small forward, Jesse?
Yeah, I think he is. Yeah.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, apparently.
Like they're the type of players that you're throwing. You're having a throw at the stumps. If they turn into nothing, sure, that's okay. At least you have a crack on them, knowing that there was a potential there early in their career, not Fisher in that mid-career. But there are, again, there'll also be some role players. There'll be players pushed out. Frost, as I said, might be one out of Hawthorn who won't get a game next year. There'll be other players like that who can come in, whose bodies haven't failed them yet. So,
What about Ollie Lord?
yeah, look, so from the Port Adelaide perspective, and again, I'm very reluctant to deal with Port Adelaide, but they're a very interesting case because if you look at their forward line and who they've got really available to them, they do have some young forwards that I reckon are worth having a look at. They've got Georgiades, who looked really good in the finals thus far. He's been really solid. I think we've had a few cracks at him. I'd keep continuing to have a crack at him. That would be the ultimate revenge for mine. That would make it a little bit easier. But yeah, look, someone like him would be good. Todd Marshall's still there. He gets injured a lot, but it does mean you've got someone like Ollie Lord, 22 games. He's 22. He only played the 6 games this year. I think he's got a fair bit of upside. Now, from a scoring perspective, he averages a goal a game. But you're talking about a 22-year-old kid who's hardly played football, hardly been given the opportunity to play. I think he's only played 2 seasons.
He's kicked 4 goals in a final.
Yeah, so I've seen some upside there. That's the type of player that I think you need to get in. Have some throws at the stump. So, maybe they can throw him in as steak knives for with Houston if we offer a pretty decent pick. He'll be the Jasper Pittard of the Jared Polek deal. So. But that's a good call, Mark. That's definitely someone I've thought about, Ollie Lord. I think they've got a couple other players there as well who aren't coming up as key forwards who would be pretty interesting. So there are some key forwards around the league that I think are worth having a go at. I think the Giants, as I said earlier, they are someone that I'd be having a look at because from a forward perspective, you've got Hogan who's not going anywhere. You've got a Cadman who is seriously starting to show some signs as well. So they do have, some key forwards there that I think potentially are gettable. Now, the problem is, and I think Frank said this earlier, we're probably talking to them, but probably half the league is also talking to them because they're showing signs. I mean, Riccardi, as I said, he played the 19 games this year. What did he score? He scored 26 goals, so averaging a goal and a half a game. You got that Max Rogalski or whatever his name is. He's only aged 20. He only played 4 games this year. He scored 3 goals from there. He's quite young, but I don't mind the look of him. So there's some players out there. There's players who aren't going to get games at their club who we could potentially attract. I think that's what we've got to go for.
Hey, Jess, I was going to throw out an odd name that nobody has mentioned, but he was drafted by Clarkson. Denver Granger Barras.
See, that's a very interesting one, and I've thought about this as well because he definitely won't be at Hawthorn next year. There's absolutely no chance because, and he has one who just hasn't. He's in that draft. He's in the Will Phillips draft where a lot of the players in that draft either haven't come on or they've come on very slowly. That's the fun one where they were all in on taking Logan McDonald and then Sydney pulled that from under them and they took, Denver Granger Barras. So, yeah, look, I think that's an interesting one as well because you are right. He's definitely not going to be there next year. And look, they had players out in the weekend and all of a sudden they pulled Scrimshaw. Yeah, they've got Scrimshaw. They've got, they've got a heap of key defenders. So someone, Phillips, Weddle, Sicily, Frost, Sarong. So yeah, he's definitely not going to be there next year. It's just, is there upside to him in terms of, has he just not been, has he just not found continuity? Is he still worth a go? But, they are the type of players that you probably need to have a crack at. They're not going to cost you anything, if anything. And I think you've got to take a few punts. So, yeah, it would be an interesting one. I'd be open to taking a couple players like that who would, again, just worth a shot.
Yeah, no, you can always just take a punt and give him a year, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. So, yeah, they wouldn't be any worse than what we've got in the reserves at the moment anyway. Mark, your thoughts on any player in particular you like? I think you mentioned a couple there. Anyone else? Do we need a small forward? Are we desperate for that small forward?
Yep, it's key forwards, small forwards. That's the main thing. If you can snag a Houston, obviously we won't talk about him again, but an established gun player that could make a difference, yes. But other than that, it's small forwards and key defenders that I think we'd be happy to look at. Outside of that, we'll be going back to the draft. I think, and in and around some senior players, big-bodied players like Parker. But I think Parker would be enough. I don't think they'll go another. I'll be very shocked if they went another midfielder on top of Parker. I think that'd certainly be enough there. Outside of that, I imagine it's key position players, and they must be desperate to find a small forward. I'll be shocked if we don't pull in a senior small forward from another club somewhere.
Yeah, no, look, I don't know who that is. Whether they go to the draft and maybe in the second round they can find one, I'm not too sure. So that's probably one area of the ground where we're going to have to work on and, really find one or two in the off-season.
Owies would be good, but I keep hearing that Owies' defensive pressure is not amazing.
Yeah, he kicks goals, though. So
I'd be happy to have him. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'd be happy to have him, but I think they could work on his deficiencies. I'd be, if he's available, I think they'd be crazy not to have a crack.
Oh, definitely not. Yeah. He's someone we desperately need, that type of player. But, we'll sort of see how we go. Nick Watson is the talk of the finals and why we chose to pass him up. Frank, we're desperate for a small forward. We've just been talking about that. This guy is only going to get better. Will this decision to pass on him come back to haunt us?
What I'll say, Dean, is I'm pretty confident if Nick Watson was playing in the North forward line 100%. This year, you would not even know what he looked like. So I think it's not apples and oranges here. He really didn't fire a shot when they were 0-5. And then once the ball started to come in a different manner and much quicker, he came to life. And we haven't managed to play that kind of football all year. So I'm not concerned at all about the fact that he's playing great footy. I think he's playing great footy in a side that's playing great footy. And had we put him at our forward line, I think he would have kicked 20 goals and played half a dozen games in the twos.
Yeah, and that's fair enough. I mean, it depends who you play for. At the end of the day, it makes a big difference. Jesse, there's been some comments that ever since we took Will Phillips over Logan McDonald, that Brady Rawlings has been drafting very safely and going for the safe picks, rather than taking a little risk like maybe a key defender or even a small pressuring forward like last year. What do you think about that?
I don't know if I would necessarily say that. I don't think we've drafted key position players and we've not taken the risk of going down that path. I think we all know that. But I think that our drafting, I think we spoke about this. In the year we took Sheasel and Wardlaw, Kingy was screaming out, don't give up the pick. We need to take Cadman. There's no way why you wouldn't take Cadman. And you know what? Cadman will probably be a fantastic player. But had we gone down that path, would we have got Harry Sheasel? Maybe. I don't know. Would we have got Wardlaw? Maybe. I don't know. Probably. You wouldn't have got both. So you win some, you lose some at the draft. Would I say that we've been safe? No. I wouldn't necessarily say that. Because if you look at the draft from last year and... we took McKercher with our pick 2. I mean, I don't have any issue. I don't think anyone has any issue with that. I think he was the clear pick 2. Obviously we bid on Jed Walter with pick 3. That would have been great, but was always going to go there. So then you're really looking at your Dersma, your Watson, Riley Sanders, who I think will be one that'll be out of the doggies in a year or two because he's averaging like 40 disposals in the seconds and couldn't get a game. Curtin was obviously talked about, and there's a lot of ways you can go. I don't think we didn't take Watson because we didn't want to take a chance. I think we went for Dersma because we saw more upside in him. And there's nothing wrong in that. I completely agree with what Frank said. If Nick Watson was at North Melbourne, no one would be calling him the Wizard. There'd be no one wearing any Wizard hats. There'd be no one would know who he is, because it is the most difficult position to play in a team that isn't playing well. And he's playing well in a Hawthorn team that has some small forwards who teach him how to get free kicks. There's nothing wrong with that. They've been able to teach him that. And a forward line that is multi-dimensional and is able to score in lots of different ways. Now, he tore us apart. He had a ridiculously good final series, and I think that shows that he has a really high ceiling, the fact that he was good in finals. A lot of small forwards aren't good in finals. But do I think we played it safe? I wouldn't say we necessarily played it safe. I think, I'm not too fussed about it. We could have gone either way. You know what? If they had taken Zane Dersma, he'd probably be the Wizard. Realistically, if we're going to talk about, there's other if we're going to criticise our drafting, there's half a dozen other drafts over the last 10 years that I could criticise, and some of them are rulings. But last year's, I think we did pretty well in terms of a drafting perspective. I wasn't unhappy with our drafting last year. Wasn't unhappy with our drafting the year before. If you go further back, it does become a little bit more questionable. I think there were other decisions to be made. I mean, you could even argue the fact that there was always going to be risk-taking Jason Horne-Francis, and that the easiest option would have been to trade him for 3 first-round picks and let one of the Adelaide clubs have him. That would have probably been the safer option. That backfired. So I don't think we're playing it safe. We're probably just not playing it smart at times.
Yeah, it's pretty well summed up there, Jesse. Mark, I think you're starting to doze off. I heard you yawn before.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's all good, mate. What do you think of the whole Nick Watson debate? Now, a lot of media have come out and sort of said this is going to come back to ruin. The boys have said, he looks good in a pretty good team. He wouldn't do much at us. Where do you sit with it?
Okay, well, first of all, I need to admit that in 2018, I spent the entire season whinging that we drafted LDU instead of Jaden Stevenson in the year when he won the Rising Star. I was fuming that we didn't have that fast small forward, saying that's exactly what we needed. LDU's only average, he's not doing much, blah, blah, blah. And obviously that's been proven to be completely incorrect. So you've got to be very careful about what looks good in that first 24 months of a draftee thing. And obviously Jaden Stevens has been very disappointing since then. But I think Nick Watson's a gun, and I think he would have stood out for us this year. As much as the other guys think he wouldn't have, I think he would have shown signs with us that probably would have got us an extra couple of wins in having a gun small forward like that, because he's a man-child. He's not really the typical 18-year-old. He's running around with a moustache last year doing the same sort of thing at under 18s, and he's a very strong young kid, albeit very small. That said, I totally agree with both Frank and Jesse that it's just not a like-for-like comparison. And we're down the bottom two. He wouldn't have been able to have the same success with us, certainly, as he's had with Hawthorn. But our problem wasn't the ball getting in there; it was keeping it in our forward line a lot of the time, and a lot of that was because we didn't have those sort of high-pressure small forwards. The argument is not so much whether Dersman's going to be a better player; it's whether we needed another mid-sized forward when we already had a whole stack of them. That to me is a bit of an issue. That if they're both going to be all Australian players, which one would you prefer? We'd probably prefer a small forward. So, given we had Ford, Zerha already on top of George, albeit he's got the injured knee, you could argue that unfortunately we put Dersma in a position where he needs to be a superstar to justify it, because we've got so many others and we've got no small forwards. So I think Dersma's going to be a gun. That's not my issue. My issue is that we desperately needed a small forward. And I think we missed a bit of an opportunity there. But time will tell. I think Dersma will be a great player. long as we can find another small forward that can fill that role, it won't really matter too much. But we've struggled to do it for a lot of years. I think Curtis is a gun small forward, but to me, he's more of a mid. He plays sort of that hybrid role. So he's another one in that marking sort of mid-sized forward role. We don't really have a genuine crumbing gun forward who's high pressure. So that's the only thing I find a bit of concerning, that we pass on that opportunity. But look, only time will tell. I'm not too stressed about it. I'm not really having a go at the North recruiting team for taking Dersma, because you can't, Brad Johnson of Bulldogs thinks he will end up being the best player out of that draft. That's how highly his talent's thought of, because as a junior he didn't work very hard. His talent just let him get away with his freakish talent let him get away with so much. So I think if he starts to work hard off the ground, he'll come to the fore really, really fast. But it's more of a needs issue for me. But look, you can't go back in time. We've just got to make the best of it and try and find another small forward.
No, that's all we can do now. You've got to move forward. You can't, as long as we're not dwelling about it, or anyone at the club is dwelling about it on the inside, then you can only move forward and worry about what you've got now. Frank, we had the BNF count on Saturday. We've had enough of this trade talk and all that. We'll move forward. A little surprised as to who won, just a little bit, but not completely shocked. Happy for LDU to get the win.
Yeah, Dean, I am. Probably not my pick. I thought Sherry was probably the most consistent of in our team for the entirety of the year. But we know club BNFs are always there's always votes given for role players and stuff like that. So it does throw up the odd anomaly. Not real stressed about the top three, but I probably would have had a Sherry, LDU, and maybe Sheasel, or the other way around, Sheasel, LDU. So no real issue with the top three for me.
Yeah, Jesse, I mean, I was a little bit surprised, but like I said, I wasn't completely shocked that he won. I probably would have had Sheasel, Sherry as 1A, and then LDU as the third. I mean, it was a clear top three anyway. What do you make of it?
Yeah, look, my initial reaction is that it should have been Sheasel or Tristan. That was my thought. But I think you've also got to remember that patch, especially in the middle of the year that LDU had, was best in the comp. He was, for a patch in the middle of the year, probably the best midfielder in the comp in a really, really poor team. So I think it's easy for us to gloss over the fact that LDU started the year slow, probably didn't have a great finish to the year, but for the middle of the year, how good he was, because we had a 19-year-old doing what he was doing, and we had someone who I said was unsalvageable running around as the almost all-Australian ruckman. So, yeah, look, I probably would have had the others first. Not disappointed at all. He probably got ripped off a couple of years ago when Jai won it, to be honest. I think it was the second time. I think LDU was clearly the best that year. Not to go back on a negative note, I'm more concerned about the other players that made up the top 10, to be completely honest, than LDU. I think at the end of the day, he was pretty well deserving. I hope that he goes into next year playing like he did for the middle of this year. I mean, ultimately, LDU was the 2019. He was the 18th ranked player in the competition this year, ahead of Sheasel, behind Tristan, albeit. But so he did have a fantastic year. So look, wasn't my pick, but well deserving. But I think there was some other players in the top 10 that raised some eyebrows for mine.
Yeah, we'll talk. I'll get your thoughts on that in a second there, Jesse. Mark, happy for LDU to finally break through, I guess, and get his maiden best and fairest. Like Jesse sort of mentioned earlier, it was a bit stiff a couple of years ago where Jai Simpkin won it. I thought he had a better year that year. So it was probably, it probably balances out that he gets the win this year.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's not a bad thing to happen when we were trying to re-sign him either.
Well, true.
No, to be honest, Cherry, Shees, or he could have won, and I would have been equally as happy. I think that's
it's a fair result. Yeah, no issue at all.
No, fair enough, Mark. That's very little words for you, which is unusual. Maybe you're getting a bit tired. Maybe the red wine's really kicking in now. So, Frank, any surprises in the top 10 for you? Paul Curtis, 4th, Tom Powell, 5th, Charlie Commons, 7th. I mean, it was good to see that other tier coming through a little bit. Players are in the 3rd, 4th, 5th years really kicking along and coming through.
Yep, absolutely. You want me to say it, don't you, Dean?
What's that?
We all know where we're going. Oh, we're going to pick 9, aren't we, at some point? Yeah, because that was the one that probably surprised. Let's be honest, that was probably the one that surprised us the most. And I think rightfully so. I have no issue with any of the others. Again, I'll just say that I think club BNFs get a lot of emphasis on role playing and shut down roles and stuff like that. But I was surprised to see Luke McDonald finish 9th, and I think a lot of people would have been surprised with that.
Yeah, are you a bit surprised? Are you the same there, Jesse? A bit surprised that someone like Luke McDonald came 9th? I mean, I guess it was good that I think he played pretty much every game of the year except for the round 1 game, so that probably helps in a poor team. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm pretty embarrassed, to be honest. I know that's pretty damning, given he's one of our captains, so you'd expect him to be in there. Yeah, if I look at player rating this year, he is the 18th rated player on our list, which I think is probably a fair assessment. Yeah. Look, LDU X, she's all happy with. Curtis, I probably don't think he was 4th, but he had a really, really good year. Powell, I think, had really good patches to the year, albeit had to play completely out of position for probably 75% of the year. But I think he showed real signs. Charlie Comben, especially down back, was fantastic. Really happy with him. Core had a really good patch during the year, so I can understand him making it. I'm pretty happy that Archer got a good look in, because once he actually got into the side, I think he played some really important roles. So that kind of leaves 2 names that I haven't spoken about. I'm going to go to Zerha first. That, for me, was almost as puzzling as Luke McDonald. And maybe I'm being very harsh on Cam Zerha. I just don't think he had that good of a year. I honestly just do not think he had that good of a year. I mean, he kicked 29 goals, so he kicked less than Paul Curtis. It's not a terrible outing. I mean, Nick Larkey also had a much poorer year, but he was very flaky and inconsistent for mine, Cam Zerha. And Luke McDonald, it just raises eyebrows. For mine, George Wardlaw would have been in there above Luke McDonald or Cam Zerha for mine. God, I think there'd be a few players who would almost get a look in. I think Bailey Scott probably had a better year than Luke McDonald.
Yeah, that's surprising, that one, that he wasn't.
I don't think he had a fantastic year, but I think that he was consistent. And for mine, I'm really surprised he didn't make the top 10. I'm surprised he didn't make the top 10. I'm surprised George Wardlaw didn't make the top 10. He played 18 games. He probably did more in 18 games than some of the others did. So that. Yeah, it's just very interesting for mine. Those 2 raised question marks, especially Luke McDonald, because that says to me that they're happy with what he's doing and what he's offering, and they're just going to keep him captain, and they're not worried about his leadership. That's what it kind of says to me, because they're the coaches who are putting this in. So that worries me a little bit, because I'm definitely not happy with what he's producing at the moment.
I guess the biggest disappointment, Mark, is Josh Simpkin not in the top 10. Concussion issues and never really getting going. Maybe the last few weeks he did, but hopefully he can bounce back and have a full run at pre-season next year from day one and really set himself up for next year, Mark.
Yeah, I thought Larkey and Josh Simpkin were the two obvious ones that were sitting outside that. Which I think is a lot to do with the way they're recruiting this year. I think that's why Parker's coming in, and I think that's why Jack Darling is. Because they feel like there's too much pressure being put on the few senior players that we've got. And as a result, they feel like they need to bring in some to support them. Because that was glaring that both those guys missed the top 10. So Luke McDonald was interesting. I think that's probably... probably an indication that we don't know as much about how much...
he does?
Yeah.
Off-field, yeah.
Well, not just off-field, but
or on-field in terms of...
On-field in what he's trying to cover for in terms of what we lack. It makes me feel like in a good side, he'd be playing a completely different role than the one he does. And he's probably he probably tries too hard at times, and he's trying to cover for a lot of other players. I suspect if that wasn't the case, he just wouldn't poll that high. Like there's people like Alistair Clarkson. There's a very senior people who know a hell of a lot about football, more than we could ever imagine. So they're not giving him votes just to be kind. They see him doing a role that they appreciate heavily. So there's a reason he's getting those sort of votes to put him in that position. Now, clearly he's not he's not a superstar of the comp, but in terms of the role he's playing at the club, they must value it, or he just wouldn't be getting those votes. Clarkson's too experienced, and the people around him are too experienced. That just wouldn't be happening. So, I think we have to give him, McDonald, some credit for the fact he's finished there, because we're watching from a different view than what the coaches are, and from a different understanding. So, I don't begrudge him that. I just assume that I'm not seeing stuff, and I'm watching on TV most of the time. Living in New South Wales, so I'm not even seeing it live. So, I've just got to, accept that they know more than what I can see, because obviously we're seeing him turn it over and make mistakes, and he looks like he's scrambling a lot. I think he's trying to probably cover for a few players in that back line. So probably just to give him a bit more credit. But yeah, other than that, I was pleased to see a lot of young players in that sort of top 10.
Yeah, and that's the most important thing. Like, you want those, second, third, fourth year players coming through. We've got about 4 of them in there. So that was the most pleasing thing. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to put too much emphasis on a best and fairest when you only win 3 games. I don't think it means as much when it's a poor team. There's usually only generally 2 or 3 players that put themselves in it, and all the rest are going to be up and down and inconsistent, which is what happens. So, yeah, we won't talk any more about the BNF. In saying that, Frank, that's all I have, unless you wanted to add anything else.
No, Dean. I think that we've covered it all. So now we just kind of sit back and enjoy the next couple of weeks, and then wait for silly season to fully kick into gear. And I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about when that does happen.
Yeah, it's pretty much already kicked in.
Yep.
It'll only get sillier over the next few weeks. Jesse, any final thoughts out there?
No, not from me, mate.
That's
from
enough.
me. We've said enough. We'll just get into the silly season, see what happens, go to the draft, see what happens. That's all we can do.
Yeah, well, who knows? We might not have a draft pick. Who knows? We might just give it all up for Dan Houston, so we'll see how we go. Mark, any final thoughts out there for all your loyal listeners?
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh. It'd be at least 1 or 2.
Yeah, Bomber Boss.
Yeah, number 1.
That's right. But I've just got my fingers crossed that we get through the trade and draft period and set ourselves up for a better year. I think all we want to see is some good experienced players come in and draft some good kids. And if we do that, and then we all know we can't finish bottom 2 next year. I think they're going to have to make some inroads next year, and I think Clarkson knows it too. So hopefully the players are going to pre-season, and they understand they're going to have to come back, drive a much higher standard than they've done before. And I think all the supporters are hoping that's going to happen. I think it will.
Well, we're certainly hoping so. Well, boys, it's been a pleasure tonight. As Jesse's cut out by the looks of it, he's had enough. Frank was yawning before. He looks like he's had enough. It's been a long episode, boys. A lot of talk. Frank, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. I'm sure I'll chat to you in a couple of weeks when there's more to talk about as far as play movement goes.
Yeah, look forward to it, Dean. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you, Frank. Mark, always a pleasure. And I'm sure I'll chat to you in a couple of weeks when there is more player movement as well.
Excellent. Thanks, buddy.
And Jesse, I'm not too sure what happened with you. You've cut out, so I'll thank you for coming on tonight as well. And thank you to all you lovely listeners for all the likes, retweets, and comments, and all the things you do to help out the show. I'll be back tomorrow night to talk about the AFLW. I should have a couple of special guests on for that, so I'm looking forward to that. Until then, bye for now, and go Roos.